The hero of The Sun Also Rises, Jake Barnes, has much to identify him with Hemingway. He is a writer living in Paris in the 20s. He was a Midwestern American who fought the Austrians on the Italian front, and he spent a good deal of his time drinking in cafes, fishing, or watching bullfights. The novel is developed against backgrounds simply described, but with such accuracy, they become a part of experience. The dialogue flows so easily that the reader often feels, I could have written this book. But it's put together with the precision of a watch, and every part meshes perfectly, all driven by a mainspring of inevitability.
The Sun Also Rises I started in Valencia on my 25th birthday. Everybody my age had written a novel, and I was still having trouble with a paragraph. I wrote all through the Feria, went on to Madrid, and wrote there. It finally got too hot, and we went to Hendaye. I worked very well there, and then we went up to Paris and finished the first draft in the apartment over the sawmill. 6 weeks from the day I started it.
The climax of The Sun Also Rises takes place during the festival of San Fermín in Pamplona, where by tradition the bulls are run through the streets of the town. In 1923, Hemingway covered this event for the Toronto Star.
In Pamplona, high up in the hills of Navarre, is held each year the World Series of bullfighting. All the carnivals I had ever seen paled in comparison. All night long, the wild music kept up in the street below. Men, blue-shirted, bareheaded, came whirling and floating in a wild, fantastic dance down the street behind the rolling drums and shrill pipes. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, and from far away there was a dull report. They're off, everybody shouted. What is it? I asked the man next to me who was leaning far out over the concrete rail. The bulls. They came in sight. 8 bulls galloping along, full tilt, heavy set, black, glistening, sinister, their horns bare, tossing their heads. They ran in a solid mass, and ahead of them sprinted, tore, ran, and bolted the rear guard of men and boys of Pamplona. This has been going on each year since a couple of 100 years before Columbus had his historic interview with Queen Isabella in the camp outside of Granada.
The spectacle of the bullfight affected Hemingway so deeply, he was to become one of the world's authorities on the subject. Death in the Afternoon, his book on bullfighting, is the definitive work in the English language. But here are some excerpts from his dispatches to the Toronto Star. The films of Hemingway were taken in 1959. But the words are from his first written account of the first bullfight he ever saw.
In the front rank walked the 3 espadas, or toreros, who would have charge of the killing of the 6 bulls of the afternoon. Just behind them, and after your first bullfight, you do not look at their costumes, but their faces, march the teams, or cuadrillas. The bullfighters march across the sand. They march with easy professional strides, swinging along with the grace and slight slouch of the professional athlete. The big gate was shut and bolted. There was no more entrance. The ring was complete. The crowd had been shouting and yelling. Now it was dead silent. Bulls are bred for speed, strength, and viciousness. Bullfighting is an exceedingly dangerous occupation. In 16 fights I saw, there were only 2 in which there was no one badly hurt. apologize for bullfighting. It is a survival of the days of the Roman Colosseum, but it does need some explanation. Bullfighting is not a sport. It was never supposed to be. It is a tragedy. A very great tragedy. The tragedy is the death of the bull. It is played in 3 definite acts. First, the entry of the bull, when the picadors receive the shock of his attack and attempt to protect their horses with their lances. The second act is the planting of the banderillas, 3-foot gaily colored dots with the fishhook prong at the end. The bandolero walks out into the arena alone with the bull. The bull charges, and the bandolero rises to his toes, bends in a curve forward, and just as the bull is about to hit him, drops the darts into the bull's hump just back of his horns. The last act is the death of the bull, which is most formal and can only be brought about in one way, directly from the front by the matador. Before killing him, however, he must first do a series of passes with the muleta, a piece of red cloth he carries about the size of a large napkin. With the muleta, the torero must show his complete mastery of the bull, must make the bull miss him again and again by inches before he is allowed to kill him. Receive the bull in full charge and kill him with a sword thrust between the shoulders just back of the neck and between the horns. In the final act, it is him or the bull. There are no drawn battles in bullfighting.
From 1923 on, Spain was the foreign country in which Hemingway felt most at home. During the 13 years after that first fair at Pamplona, he spent much time following the bullfights, fishing for trout in the Pyrenees, wandering the bare and somber landscapes of the Guadarrama Mountains, and writing in the compatible atmosphere of Spain. The Sun Also Rises, Death in the Afternoon, and some of his best short stories were written there. When the Spanish Civil War began in 1936, Hemingway found himself a deeply committed anti-communist partisan on the loyalist side. He gave $40,000 of his own money to buy ambulances and established headquarters at the Florida Hotel in Madrid, which was under frequent bombardment. Later, he went out to cover the most active combat areas for the North American Newspaper Alliance. His salary of $500 a week was donated to the Loyalists. Hemingway despised fascism from his first glimpse of it when he had interviewed Mussolini in 1923. He conceived a rabid hatred for it in its Italian and German varieties when he saw the armies and air forces of those two countries testing their war machines on the Spaniards, to whom he was a most loyal friend.
You grow accustomed to war, but no one becomes accustomed to murder. And murder on a large scale we saw every day for 19 days. The totalitarian fascist states believe in a totalitarian war. That put simply means whenever they are beaten by armed forces, they take their revenge on unarmed civilians. If I described it, it might make you hate. But we do not want hate. We want a reasoned understanding of the criminality of fascism and how it should be opposed. We must realize that these murders are the gestures of a bully. There is only one way to quell a bully, and that is to thrash him, and the bully of fascism is being beaten now in Spain as Napoleon was beaten in the same peninsula 130 years ago.
Hemingway had a remarkable vision of the probable course of the events of the next decade and expressed it with clarity, but not enough people listened.
Have you read Hitler's speech? If you have, you know there's going to be a war. One thing can delay it. If Hitler loses confidence in his allies. The way to avoid the World War is to end it where it has begun, in Spain, by smashing world fascism's weakest link, the beatable Italian military machine. If Italy could be beaten in Spain, as Napoleon was beaten there, the Berlin, Rome, Tokyo axis would be broken before it ever had a chance to make the war it threatens.
Those were excerpts from articles written from the Florida Hotel, the early part of 1938. It was also in the Florida Hotel that Hemingway wrote his only play, The Fifth Column. It was an effort to make the true facts of the war in Spain alive to the rest of the world.
Each day we were shelled, and while I was writing the play, the Hotel Florida, where we lived and worked, was struck by more than 30 high-explosive shells. So if it is not a good play, perhaps that is what is the matter with it. If it is a good play, perhaps those 30-some shells helped write it.
Hemingway was seldom out of the range of enemy guns and aircraft. He was a scholar on the subject of war, and he increased his knowledge the hard way.
When a man goes to seek the truth in war, he may find death instead. But if 12 go and only 2 come back, the truth they bring will be the truth, and not the garbled hearsay that will pass as history.
Out of his admiration and deep affection for the Spanish people, and his hatred for fascism, and out of his knowledge of the war and the lives of its participants, Hemingway wrote a superb novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls. In this book, the hero, Robert Jordan, again a hero with many points of identification with Hemingway, feels about the war as Hemingway did. At the end of the novel, Jordan, wounded and resigned to death, aims his automatic rifle toward the Italian invaders preparing to fire.
If we win here, we will win everywhere. The world is a fine place, worth the fighting for, and I hate very much to leave it. Then he looked up at the sky. There were big white clouds in it. He touched the palm of his hand against the pine needles where he lay, and he touched the bark of the pine trunk that he lay behind. And then he rested as easily as he could with his 2 elbows on the pine needles and the muzzle of the submachine gun resting against the trunk of the pine tree.
In this book, Hemingway's superlative skill as a writer is evident on every page. His dialogue is so true that in English he makes the rhythms of Spanish absolutely natural. Every character is a real and solid person, fulfilling a genuine function in a real and solid world. But the most important thing about this book is something else. It is the first time Hemingway or his hero follows a cause bigger than the desire for experience. The hero has become a fighter for people, weaker than himself. The title of the book comes from one of the most perfect passages in literature. It's by John Donne. We quote it in part. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, part of the main. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. In 1933, Hemingway made an extended safari into Africa and emerged with some fine heads and skins of animals. But the most important trophies were the books about his experiences on the safari, The Green Hills of Africa, and 2 of the best short stories in American literature, The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber and The Snows of Kilimanjaro. The hunting of big game was one of Hemingway's greatest pleasures. He was proud of the accuracy of his shooting, the endurance which made it possible for him to hike the steepest or the rockiest or the muddiest terrains from sunrise to dark, and more than anything else, his nervelessness in the face of danger. Nature provided facilities for these talents with great abundance in Africa. The plains were alive with game. Hunting gave point and zest to Hemingway's life. It provided a first-hand, face-to-face opportunity to live by the code.
Kilimanjaro is a snow-covered mountain 19,710 feet high and is said to be the highest mountain in Africa. Its western summit is called the Masaingai, the House of God. Close to the western summit, there is the dried and frozen carcass of a leopard. No one has explained what the leopard was doing at that altitude.
That is the beginning of the snows of Kilimanjaro. Discipline is the spine of a writer's life. This story of a writer's default was written at a time when Hemingway was deeply concerned over his own breaches of work discipline. The leopard might represent a try for immortality. He got high enough to reach the eternal snow, and in that icy place he will never spoil. Harry, the writer, below on the plain, dying of the gangrene of his rotting leg, sold out. He never made his bid for immortality.
A writer should be of as great probity as a priest of God. He is either honest or not, as a woman is chaste or not. And after one piece of dishonest writing, he is never the same again.
World War II came, when and how Hemingway had predicted some years earlier it would, and he was in it. Free-swinging, commanding, heavily bearded, and paternal. He was only 42, but he was already Papa. He had been for some time. He was by then well recognized as one of the world's great authors, and also something of an authority on war.
I have seen much war in my lifetime, and I hate it profoundly. There are worse things than war, and all of them come with defeat. The more you hate war, the more you know that once you are forced into it, for whatever reason it may be, you have to win it. You have to win it and get rid of the people that made it and see that this time, it may never come to us again.
He got himself accredited to the Royal Air Force as a correspondent. He flew a number of missions, and then he was attached in rapid succession to the 3rd Army, an American pursuit squadron in France, and the 4th Infantry Division, where he shared the lives of the GIs of the 22nd Infantry Regiment. This regiment was in a constant series of battles, climaxed by one in Hürtgen Forest that lasted nearly 3 weeks. 2 out of every 3 men were casualties. Hemingway stayed with the regiment during this entire action. But the war really became his kind of war when he commandeered a jeep and, shooting ahead of the entire Allied army, established contact with French guerrilla fighters. When an armored column started toward Paris, Hemingway, by his knowledge of military strategy, knew they would encounter German resistance on the way. So he went through the back roads with a force of 200 men and was fighting at the Arc de Triomphe while the assembled armies were still on the outskirts of Paris. Venice is the scene of Hemingway's next book. From all he knew of the Second World War, from a composite of all his experience, came Across the River and Into the Trees. The hero is a badly beat-up professional soldier of 50 years who, like Hemingway, had fought to defend Venice from the Austrians at Possalta when he was 19. When he was Nick Adams, just become Lieutenant Frederick Henry. Now he is Colonel Cantwell, on leave in Venice.
We are coming into my town. It is my city because I fought for it when I was a boy. And now that I am half a hundred years old, they know I fought for it. And I am a part owner, and they treat me well.
The Colonel is closer to Hemingway than any of his other heroes, down to details, down to the loss of his right kneecap at Possalta. He is a unique combination of toughness and tenderness, a man in love with a girl 30 years younger than he. In spite of his richly sensual descriptions of Venice, the food, the wines, and the love of his beautiful and aristocratic girl, this is the least successful book Hemingway wrote. Critics jumped all over it. The book can only distress anyone who admires Hemingway. Another said, it is not only Hemingway's worst novel, it is a synthesis of everything that is bad in his previous work. It throws a doubtful light on the future. Nothing happens, they said.
Sure, they can say anything about nothing happening and across the river. But all that happens is the breakthrough in Normandy, the taking of Paris, and the destruction of the 22nd Infantry Regiment in Hurtgen Forest, plus a man who loves a girl and dies. Only it is all done with 3 cushion shots. In writing, I have moved through arithmetic, through plain geometry and algebra, and now I'm in calculus. If they don't understand that, to hell with them.
Hemingway Angry was a great competitor. The critics surely had hurt him, although he wouldn't admit it, and he was going to defend himself the way he had to.
It is sort of fun to be 50 and feel you're going to defend the title again. I won it in the 20s and defended it in the 30s and 40s. I don't mind at all defending it in the 50s.
He defended his title by writing another novel. This time, the critics said, The Old Man and the Sea is destined to become a classic in its time. Another said, when the taut line cut the old man's hands and the sun pounded on his skull, my hands hurt and my head ached. They went on to say, the book is as faultless as any short novel of our times. It needs no interpretation and stands as it is, beautiful and glorious with the majesty of man. The book won him both the Nobel and Pulitzer Prizes. He was champ again.
Who the hell wants fame over a weekend? All I want is to write well.
He had been living for some years in Cuba at Finca Vigía, Lookout Farm, an estate of 15 acres with gardens, tennis courts, and a swimming pool. An easygoing establishment in spite of its staff of more than a half-dozen servants. Here is the living legend, the handsome head photographed with the world's celebrities, the sportsman we have seen standing by the giant fish, the fallen lion. Here is the expert, skier, soldier, the man who never got past high school, but spoke French, Spanish, and Italian fluently. Here is a naturalist, a navigator, an authority on bullfighting and on boxing. Here is a man who sought the most dangerous conditions the world could offer, but who could be shaken by the sight of a black cat and who hated to travel on Friday. This unique man, this aggregate of powerful appetites, justified his existence on Earth when he climbed these stairs and went through this door. For this is where he sculpted with words the living human beings in a solid, real, and tangible world. This is where he was a creator.
When I am working on a book or a story, I write every morning as soon after first light as possible. There is no one to disturb you, and it is cool or cold, and you come to your work and warm as you write. You write until you come to a place where you still have your juice and know what will happen next, and you stop and try to live through until the next day when you hit it again. You have started at 6 in the morning, say, and may go on until noon or maybe through before that. When you stop, you are as empty and at the same time never empty, but filling, as when you have made love to someone you love. The hardest thing in the world to do is to write straight, honest prose on human beings. First you have to know the subject, then you have to learn how to write. Both take a lifetime to learn. I use the oldest words in the English language. I know the $10 words, but there are older and better words which, if you arrange them in proper combination, you make it stick. A writer can be compared to a well. There are as many kinds of wells as there are writers. The important thing is to have good water in the well, and it is better to take a regular amount out than to pump the well dry and wait for it to refill. The country that a novelist writes about is the country he knows. And the country that he knows is in his heart. Once writing has become your major vice and greatest pleasure, only death can stop.